I didn't realize I loved him the night he left. That's the part that still messes with me. People like to imagine love as this obvious, cinematic thing. Light bulb moments, dramatic confessions, music swelling in the background. For me, it was quieter, slower. It crept in through routines and shared silences, and the way his presence felt normal enough that I stopped questioning it. And by the time I finally understood what it was, it had already settled into the past tense. Noah and I met the way a lot of adult friendships start, accidentally through convenience. Same apartment building, same broken elevator, same irritated small talk that somehow turned into coffee, then beer, then you can crash on my couch if you want. He had this way of making everything feel unforced, like nothing was ever a big deal, even when it probably should have been. We fell into a rhythm fast, grocery runs together, late dinners eaten straight from the pan, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, feet touching without either of us moving away. I told myself it was just comfort, that I was just relieved to have someone around who didn't demand anything from me, someone who stayed. Looking back, I can see how many chances I had to say something, or do something, or at least ask the right questions. But I didn't. Because Noah was always halfway elsewhere. He talked about moving like it was inevitable, like his life was a series of temporary stops, and I was just another one. He never said it cruelly, just matter of fact, and I nodded along, pretending that didn't bother me, pretending I wasn't silently hoping he'd change his mind. The night he told me he'd accepted a job across the country, I congratulated him. I even smiled. I remember the exact way his face softened when I did, like he'd been bracing himself for disappointment, and was relieved when I didn't give it to him. That smile still hurts when I think about it. We drank that night. Not a lot. Just enough to blur the edges. He sat closer than usual, shoulder brushing mine, head tipped back in laughter over something stupid I'd said. I remember thinking, this feels like something, and then immediately talking myself out of it. Because what kind of idiot waits this long? He left 3 weeks later. I helped him load the car. Stood there in the parking lot while he hugged me a second too long. Long enough that my chest tightened in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Long enough that I almost said it. Almost. But then he pulled away, thanked me for being such a big part of his life, and drove off like nothing had just cracked open inside me. It wasn't until I went back upstairs, into an apartment that suddenly felt too quiet, that it hit me. I loved him. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that demands grand gestures. The kind that settles in and makes a home in you. The kind that makes you assume there will always be more time. I stood there in the doorway, keys still in my hand, realizing the truth with brutal clarity. And realizing I was too late. The worst part isn't that I never told him. It's that, for a long time, I didn't even know I should have. The days after Noah left blurred together in a way that scared me. Not dramatically. Nothing broke. I still woke up, still went to work, still answered emails, and nodded at coworkers like I hadn't just lost something I never officially had. But everything felt slightly misaligned. Like my life was a picture frame that had been knocked crooked, and no matter how often I straightened it, it never sat right again. I kept expecting him to text, not even something meaningful, just a meme, a complaint about traffic, a photo of whatever sad dinner he'd thrown together in his new place. We'd done that kind of nothing communication for years, and my body hadn't caught up to the idea that it was over. When his name didn't light up my phone, I told myself it was fine. He was busy, settling in, making friends, being the version of himself that didn't orbit my life anymore. That realization sat heavier than I wanted to admit. I tried to date. That part feels almost funny now. I downloaded the apps. Went on a few drinks that turned into politeness dates. Listened to strangers tell me about their hobbies, their exes, their plans for the future. And every time, without fail, I caught myself measuring them against Noah in ways that weren't fair and weren't conscious. They laughed too loudly. Or not enough. They leaned in when Noah would have leaned back. They asked questions he never did. Or worse, they didn't. One guy reached for my hand across a table, and my first instinct was panic. Not because I didn't want intimacy, but because it felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. like my body was rejecting something my mind had agreed to. I went home early that night and sat on my couch, staring at the empty space where Noah used to sprawl out with his legs thrown over the armrest. I realized then that I wasn't just missing him. I was grieving the version of myself I'd been when I thought he'd always be there. A month after he moved, I finally heard from him. Just a simple text. "Com Sibes, miss you, man. Hope you're good." I stared at it longer than I should have. My chest tightened, that familiar ache blooming like it had been waiting for permission. I typed out 3 different responses before settling on something casual. Something safe. Something that didn't reveal how carefully I'd learned to live without him. We started talking again after that. Slowly. Sporadically, like we were both afraid to step too hard on old ground. He told me about his job, his new apartment, the bar down the street where the bartender already knew his order. I told him about work, about how the building's elevator still broke down every other week, about how nothing much had changed. That last part was a lie, because everything had changed, just quietly. Some nights, after we talked, I'd lie in bed, replaying his voice in my head, wondering if he ever thought about me the way I thought about him, wondering if there had ever been a moment, any moment, where he'd felt the same pull and dismissed it the way I had. I didn't ask. I didn't confess. I didn't risk it. Instead, I learned how to carry the truth alone, and that might have been the hardest part. Not losing him, but realizing that loving him had rewired me in ways that didn't disappear just because he did. By the time I accepted that, the ache had softened into something dull but permanent. Not a wound, a scar. The first time I saw Noah again, it wasn't planned. That feels important to say, because if I'd known ahead of time, I would have prepared. I would have shaved, slept better, braced myself emotionally. I would have decided what version of myself to be, the chill one, the unaffected one, the friend who'd moved on. Instead, I was standing in line at a coffee shop near my office, half awake and irritated about nothing in particular, when I heard my name spoken in that familiar voice that my body still recognized before my brain did. I turned around too fast. There he was, older somehow, or maybe just different, a little more settled in his skin. Same easy posture, same crooked smile that had once felt like home. He looked surprised, then genuinely happy, and that reaction alone knocked the air out of my lungs. "Holy shit," he said. "Elliot." I smiled back automatically, even though my chest was already tight. "Hey." We did the awkward catch-up dance right there by the counter. "How long are you in town?" "Just a few days." "Work thing." I told him my office was nearby, like that meant something. Like proximity still mattered. He suggested we sit, just for a minute. Coffee was already in his hand, so it felt harmless enough. Familiar enough. Sitting across from him again was surreal. Close enough to notice the new crease near his mouth, the faint scar on his knuckle I didn't remember. He talked easily, filling the space the way he always had, and I nodded along, laughing in the right places, pretending my heart wasn't trying to climb out of my throat. At one point, he stopped mid-sentence and studied me. "You okay?" he asked. Not casually, genuinely. I hesitated, just for half a beat. Then I said, "Yeah, I'm good." Another lie, softer than the last ones, more practiced. He seemed to accept it, but something in his expression shifted, like he'd sensed the distance, even if he didn't know how to name it. When we stood to leave, he pulled me into a hug without asking. It was familiar enough that my body relaxed into it before I could stop myself. For a split second, everything felt the same. And then it didn't. We said goodbye on the sidewalk. No promises. No "let's grab dinner." Just a vague text me, like neither of us wanted to test what might happen if we made actual plans. I watched him walk away, and for the first time since he'd left, I didn't feel the urge to follow. That surprised me. What I felt instead was clarity, not the kind that erases feelings, but the kind that finally puts them in context. Loving Noah hadn't been a mistake, but neither was letting him go without a confession that would have changed everything. Some things are real without being meant to last. I walked back to my office slowly, letting that truth settle. The ache was still there, but it was quieter now, less sharp. Like something that had finally been acknowledged instead of ignored. I understood then that timing matters, just as much as feeling. That love, on its own, isn't always enough. And that realizing it too late doesn't make it any less real. It just makes it something you carry instead of something you live. That night when I went home, the apartment didn't feel empty in the same way it used to. It felt finished. Not closed, not forgotten, just complete. For a while, after seeing Noah again, I thought that was it. A neat little bow. Closure. The kind people talk about like it's something you can schedule. I told myself I'd reached the end of that chapter, that the story had resolved itself quietly and without casualties. And for the most part, that was true. Life kept moving. I threw myself into work, took longer walks home instead of rushing, started cooking real meals again instead of eating over the sink. I even stopped flinching when something reminded me of him. His favorite beer showing up at the store, a song he used to play on repeat, the way autumn light hit the buildings just right. The memories softened. They stopped demanding my attention. But love doesn't disappear just because it's been acknowledged. It changes shape, becomes background noise, a low hum you only notice when everything else goes quiet. A few months later, I met someone. Not in a dramatic way, not even in a memorable one. Just a guy named Ben at a friend's birthday dinner. He sat across from me, asked thoughtful questions, listened without waiting for his turn to talk. When he smiled, it wasn't disarming or dazzling. It was steady. That mattered more than I expected. We took things slow, on purpose. No late-night confessions. No pretending we were more than we were. He didn't feel like a replacement or a distraction, and I didn't feel like I was performing a version of myself to keep him interested. One night, a few weeks in, we sat on my couch in the same spot Noah used to claim. Ben's leg brushed mine, and I didn't tense. I didn't compare. I didn't feel the need to pull away. That was when I realized something else. Loving Noah had taught me how deep I could feel. Letting him go had taught me how careful I needed to be with that depth. I never told Noah how I felt. Not because I was afraid anymore, but because the truth had already done its work. It had changed me, shaped me, made me more honest with myself than I'd ever been before. Some confessions aren't meant to be shared. Some are meant to be lived with. Every now and then, I still think about him. Usually in small moments. When the air smells like rain. When laughter catches me off guard. When I realize how quiet my heart feels compared to how loud it used to be. I don't regret loving him. I regret not knowing sooner. But regret isn't the same as ruin. It's just evidence that something mattered, that I was capable of feeling something real, even if the timing was wrong. That realization doesn't hurt the way it used to. It feels like growth, like standing still long enough to finally feel the ground under my feet. And knowing that, next time, I won't wait until it's too late. The thing about moving on is that it doesn't announce itself. There was no morning where I woke up and felt brand new. No switch flipped. No dramatic sense of relief. It happened in increments so small I didn't notice them until much later. A day where I didn't think of Noah at all. A week where his name didn't trigger that familiar tightening in my chest. A moment where I laughed, really laughed, and realized it hadn't been covering anything up. Ben never asked about him. That was intentional, I think. Or intuitive. He asked about my work, my friends, the things that made me restless, and the things that calmed me down. He noticed details. How I always rinsed my mug before putting it in the sink. How I liked walking at night more than during the day. How silence didn't make me uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. Being with him felt like standing on solid ground after a long time at sea. Still, some habits die slowly. One evening, months into whatever Ben and I were building, I caught myself almost texting Noah. Nothing important. Just a reflex. Something dumb I would have sent without thinking back when he was still woven into my daily life. I stared at the empty message box, my thumb hovering. And then I didn't send it. Not because I was angry. Not because I was trying to prove anything. But because the impulse itself felt outdated, like reaching for a light switch that no longer existed. I set my phone down and leaned back against the couch, surprised by the quiet sense of relief that followed. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't sadness. It was acceptance. Later that night, Ben fell asleep with his head on my shoulder, his breathing slow and even. I didn't feel trapped or restless or like I was borrowing someone else's place in my own life. I felt present, chosen, choosing. That was new, and it felt earned. I don't know where Noah is now. Sometimes I imagine him happy. Sometimes I imagine him lonely. Sometimes I imagine him thinking of me in the same distant, softened way I think of him. And sometimes I don't imagine him at all. That's how I know the story changed. Loving him too late didn't ruin me. It taught me something I wouldn't have learned otherwise, that timing isn't a punishment. It's a truth. And truths don't exist to hurt us. They exist to be understood. If I could go back, would I tell him? Maybe. Or maybe the version of me who didn't know yet needed that silence to become someone braver later. Someone who knows now that love isn't just about feeling. It's about recognition. About knowing when something matters while you still have the chance to act on it. I didn't have that chance with him, but I have it now. And this time, I'm not waiting. I thought I was done being surprised by Noah. That's probably the most naive thing I'd believed in a while. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, which feels almost cruel in hindsight. No build-up, no warning. Just a name lighting up my phone while I was standing in the cereal aisle, trying to decide if I was the kind of adult who bought the expensive granola or the boring one. Noah. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because my body needed a second to remember how to exist in the present. My pulse kicked up, old instincts flaring like they'd never been put to rest. I stepped aside, leaned my cart against the shelf, and answered. "Hey," I said, hoping my voice sounded neutral. "Hey," he replied. Same voice, same calm warmth. "Sorry, I know this is random." That word again. Random. As if he hadn't just reached back into a version of my life I had spent years carefully folding away. He told me he was moving back. Not permanently, he said. Just back. Same city, different place, different headspace. He talked about it like it was practical, like he hadn't just knocked the wind out of me. New role. Old connections. Something about missing the rhythm of the city. "I thought you should know," he added. "Didn't want you to hear it from someone else." I thanked him for telling me. I meant it. I also hated how instinctive that gratitude felt. We didn't talk long. He asked how I was. I said good. He said he was glad. There was a pause where something hovered between us. Unspoken, familiar, dangerous. Then he told me he'd reach out once he was settled. When the call ended, I stood there longer than necessary, staring at a shelf full of boxes I no longer cared about. My reflection in the freezer door looked steadier than I felt. The strange part wasn't the rush of feeling. I'd expected that. The strange part was what followed. Calm. Not relief. Not excitement. Just a quiet awareness that this was a test I hadn't known was coming. That night, I told Ben. Not in a dramatic way. Not like a confession. Just the facts. Noah was moving back. We used to be close. It stirred things I thought were settled. I watched Ben's face carefully, waiting for tension, jealousy, fear. What I saw instead was patience. "Do you want to see him?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "I don't know," I said honestly. Ben nodded. "Then you'll figure it out." He didn't ask me to promise anything. Didn't ask me to choose. He trusted me in a way that felt heavier than any demand could have. Later, lying awake, I realized something that should have been obvious earlier. Loving Noah had taught me how to feel, Loving Ben was teaching me how to choose. The difference mattered. Noah's return didn't feel like fate. It felt like a mirror, one final chance to see who I was now, not who I'd been when everything went unsaid. I didn't know yet what I would do. But for the first time, uncertainty didn't feel like fear. It felt like agency. And that, more than anything, told me I was ready for whatever came next. I agreed to see Noah a week after he moved back. I didn't tell myself it meant anything. I didn't frame it as closure or temptation or unfinished business. I told myself it was just two people who had once mattered a lot to each other, sitting down to catch up. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. We met at a bar we used to go to. His suggestion, not mine. Same scratch tables, same dim lights, different versions of us. When he walked in, I felt it. Not the sharp, breathless punch I might have felt once. Something steadier, familiar, like recognizing an old scar and tracing it without flinching. "You look good," he said, pulling me into a hug that was careful, respectful, a fraction of what it used to be. "So do you," I replied. And he did. Calmer. More grounded. Like someone who'd learned some things the hard way. We talked for hours. About work. About the city. About the people we'd both been while we were apart. He told me leaving hadn't fixed everything the way he'd thought it would. I told him staying hadn't either. We laughed more than I expected. Sat closer than we probably needed to. At one point, he looked at me the way he used to, head tilted slightly, expression soft, like he was about to say something that mattered. "I thought about you a lot," he admitted quietly. After I left, my chest tightened, but I didn't panic. I let the feeling exist without letting it steer. "I did too," I said. Honest, measured. There was a pause. The kind that holds possibilities. He could have said more. So could I. But instead, I did something different. I told him the truth. Not all of it. Not the version that would have unraveled both our lives. But the part that mattered most. "I loved you," I said, voice steady. "I just didn't know it until you were gone." His breath caught. I saw it in his eyes. The shock, the regret, the question of what might have been. "I think I might have loved you too," he said slowly. "I just didn't realize it until I couldn't go back." We sat with that. Let it breathe. Let it be real, without trying to resurrect it. "I'm with someone now," I added gently. Not apologetic, just clear. He nodded. No anger, no bitterness, just understanding. "Then I'm glad you told me," he said. "Even if it's late." And for the first time, late didn't feel like a failure. When we said goodbye, it was clean. No lingering touches. No promises. Just a hug that felt like punctuation instead of an ellipsis. I walked home lighter than I expected, not because the past had been erased, but because it had finally been spoken aloud. That night, I crawled into bed beside Ben and felt something settle into place. Not relief, not victory, peace. I realized then that loving Noah too late didn't mean I'd lost my chance at love. It meant I'd learned how precious timing really is, how dangerous silence can be, how important it is to recognize your feelings while you're still standing inside them. I didn't miss my chance anymore. I'd just grown into someone who wouldn't miss the next one. And that, finally, felt like love arriving right on time,